I'm going to be now picking up where we left off, doing some exploratory data analysis on the crime data that I've been working with. And because it's exploratory, I don't know exactly what we're going to be looking for, but I think one of the first things I'm going to be looking at is trying to get a sense of, if I aggregate the data at different levels, how do the counts look and how do they match up maybe with some published data that is of similar or based on the same data. So can I recreate like public reports? I think the highest profile element in my data is homicide reports. So I think I'm going to start with looking at homicide data, and I'm going to see what I can reproduce in terms of homicide counts and homicide rates for the entities in my data before I try to model anything like that. So I'm going to start. This time I'm going to do the whole sample. So we're going to be working with a much bigger set of data. I don't think it'll slow things down that much. It's not that much bigger. And if I restrict the columns, I think it should be fine. So this is going to be a big SQL query. It's going to be going through, and after it runs, we'll be able to do a bit of analysis. So one thing I added is, previously we were just working with the what's known in the columns as actual all, and that's really the total number of what the police describe as founded crime reports. So there's also unfounded crime that's reported, and those are things that the police investigate but don't press charges. It doesn't turn out to be a crime. So for murder, I'm gonna look at clearances, which is the ones that are solved or result in a charge, unfounded, and total. And I'm gonna make sure that those are reconcilable, and I'm gonna do the same thing for all fields there, to make sure that these variables actually have the relationship between them within observations that I expect. Now remember that I'm going to need to filter out observations that don't make sense or are flagged for various reasons. But first I'm going to pull in the data without doing that. The reason for that is I want to see what the data looks like without those flags, and then that's going to be my baseline to work on as I then apply business rules to restrict the data to an analytic sample that is composed of more reliable and valid data. So what we see here is the number of murders by month, by year, and we see a really big spike pattern. And I'm going to guess this corresponds with December of each month. This here is September 11th, 2001. There's a special note in the data that indicates that all the victims of the September 11th terrorist attacks were counted as independent murders and were recorded in here, as it should be. So that's a spike we expect to see. The rest of these, it looks like we have the seasonal pattern to our data that we've talked about previously, and that's something that's going to need to be taken out if we want accuracy by the month. Let's see what it looks like if we do it by year, though. That looks about right. I'd want to look at the FBI statistics and see, who published that or how that lines up. Now let's do something a little trickier. Let's look at the homicides by state over time. See what those look like. Real quick, I'm gonna switch this over. I'm not in the habit of using our notebooks, but actually they turn out to be really handy. And they weren't that handy when we were doing the data coining, but they are going to be really handy for this kind of exploratory data analysis. So oh man, I crashed our studio. Haven't done that in a while. Well, no problem. be in a bit of a loop here. I may have tried to open a file that doesn't exist. That's alright. Sometimes handy to have an alternative text editor around. I'm going to up one of my files within Atom, which is my secondary text editor that I use a lot. Alright, we dodged it there. The next thing to do is, I think I'm going to output a little bit more of the numbers, so the actual data, so that later I can go and compare this to published reports and see where these things are off a little bit. Next time I'll make sure to run these queries before I start the live stream because it's kind of boring for both of us. It's interesting that we only see the spike when we disaggregate it out by murders. We don't see the same spike here. We just continually see the December spike, which is totally fine. In that up late. Overall, in all crime reports, we see a decrease. So, that's what we see. Now what I'm going to do is, like I said, I'm going to aggregate it by state, and then I'm also going to try to incorporate the population information that is reported by the FBI. It may not be the best population information, we're going to have to see. One to check there, but it's what we get. And without having to merge any other data, we can have a rudimentary estimate of the population. So not very illuminating when we facet it by line, or we break it out by line. Spike is really a problem. So one thing we can do is again, this is exploratory. I'm not trying to make it beautiful or share it with the world. I need a geom that might help you actually be able to corner. Florida looks unusually high, and it looks like it's because there's a lot of entities in Florida that are only reporting in December, and so the data in Florida is really not monthly. So now let's go by year and see, that should take that out of the equation. Right now we can see that something's clearly up with Florida. So here we have the data for each state for the whole year. See, Florida doesn't look so weird now. They, that's the issue with the monthly reporting. That's the problem. Alright, we should filter out over 3,000. It's also interesting because California does show up here, but it doesn't looks much different than this way than it does the other way. I think that, let's filter out. And of course, something that I can consider or should consider is cleaning up the state names so that I can also have abbreviations or numbers for the states. But that's a thing to do later. So now, you think, okay, states is bad, we got to think about population. So we do have some population data, so let's see what it looks like. Specifically, what does the population of the United States look like year to year? Some error with the notebook itself, then file. Hopefully we can continue anyway. Hmm. Too big. At least that error message told me what's happening. Huh. It's by one. It's too big. It's too big. So there's going to be it must be a massive amount of double counting, because this is saying in a year the US has 3 billion. Well, actually, that's the problem. It's not by year. It should be by date plot. Divide that by Yeah, alright. So that's right. Summing by year was a problem. That gives me what I think is the population of the United States. And Cool. Population variable actually looks like it's not too bad. We'll find out if it's bad right here, I think. These are the populations of the police department's reporting. I mean, big ones are the big ones. Doesn't tell us that much, but can work with it. The next thing to do, I think, is let's just come up with a crude rate variable. So if we take two noisy variables that are measured, with some imprecision, which we suspect the homicide counts are measured with some imprecision and population is measured with some imprecision, and we've already found a couple of those imprecisions. Take those two variables and we link them together algebraically. There's another chance that we'll find different kinds of imprecisions that may, lead to some more questions. So I think it's a good idea to try that here. I don't know, murders per 10,000 people or murders per 100,000 people? Try 10,000. So this will be the rate by month. Oh, this is the murders per 10,000 people. Again, we see the problem with seasonality. So we have 200 populations are way here. 122, 720,411. Divide that by 10,000. Divide that So there's 2.3 murders per 10,000. No, that's not correct. That's not correct. I'm failing in my basic algebra here. But there's 0.43 murders per 10,000 people. So actually what I want to do per 100,000 people, there's we started around 5.75, we're all the way under 4.5 now. That's the statistic I think that makes sense. There we go. This one, we annualize it. Annualized monthly rate. Flying by 12. See the trend. Alright, now let's look at state-to-state variation. Once we take out the population, we should actually be able to see some interesting trends. We have some big outliers. Look at DC. Huge decrease in crime. Could be a coding issue. This could be something about their murders getting reported or their metro area getting carved up into other agencies taking out their statistics. So that's one to think about. New York, we can still see September 11th as a huge spike. So let's take out those spikes. Let's filter out anything over 12. Just so we can get a different view of this. Now we start to see pretty tremendous variation in locales and some time trends. Iowa looks like a pretty safe place. Hawaii, pretty safe place. New Mexico does not seem very safe on a per capita basis. Now part of that is small states, small samples. Look how volatile New Mexico is versus how smooth Ohio, California, Nebraska are. Not Nebraska, New York. Nebraska is not smooth at all. So that's part of the issue, which is where models can help. But we've identified a few issues, but overall this looks reasonable, which is good. Very good. Let's calculate the overall crime rate now and put it side by side with the homicide rate and see what we turn up. Also want to look at clearances eventually, like percentage wise, what gets cleared in a year and what doesn't, which I think is important to think about. Here's crime rates. You can see that DC very high crime rate. Overall, looks like most states are decreasing their crime rates. Overall, the rates look like they're between 2,500 and 7,500. Crimes per 100,000 people. It's high. Seems really high. But that doesn't mean offenders. One offender can account for many crimes. So that's something we need to take with a grain of salt, I think. Until I understand what goes into that field a little bit better. I'm going to output some tables now, very simple tables that I can look at later to do the statistics. And after I output the tables, I'm going to look at the relationship between cleared and uncleared crimes. And then we'll call it a wrap after that. So yeah, that looks good. By the way, thanks to everyone who's tuned in. This is the all-time peak for the number of viewers, which is a whopping 5, I think. 4 plus me, probably. But yeah, I hope you're enjoying it, and feel free to chime in the chat with questions or comment on the video after it posts if you have questions or ideas. So let's go back. Let's do total offenses by year, total offenses by state by year, and murders by year, and murders by state by year. Those 4 tables should give me a pretty good basis to start diagnosing errors in the data. And I'm dodging the month issue, which we've already talked about a lot, and I already know how I'm going to probably approach, but I need a baseline analysis first, and then I'll figure out when it's appropriate to, go in with adjustments for seasonality. So let's do all crimes by year. Let's make a table of that. Yeah, relax. Let's do 1,000 crimes. Okay. See? Thousand murders. It's probably more likely I want it in the order of the state than the year. I can look at that way. Then the next thing, the last thing I want to do, I think, was look at the relationship between clearance and the total. Oh, thanks for saying something in the chat, Elias. And no problem about not tuning in all week. I really do intend to do this pretty much every day that I work on this data, which hopefully I find funding and I get to keep working on it. So I'll keep being here and I'll keep updating the page, and you can find out when I'll be live. And I'm going to try to mix up the times a little bit too. Living in the Eastern time zone in the United States, I know when I'm ready to work is not always when other people are ready to tune in. So hopefully there'll be a nice variety, and I'm glad people find some value in it. And it's getting more interesting all the time now that we're actually past some of the very basic data cleaning stuff. Okay, so this concept of clearances, I did a bunch of background reading to understand the coding that the FBI recommends for this data, but to be honest, it was a while ago, so if I remember correctly, a clearance does not mean that there's a conviction. It just means that the police have arrested a suspect, and I think that the suspect has been formally charged with the crime. At that point, they consider the situation to be police have done their job. So I think that's pretty interesting information to find out. So let's just do a very basic calculation. And what I want to do, well, I'll just show you. Let's just look at an more interesting chunk of the data. I don't need to group it, but I want to filter where. I wonder why these are in alphabetical order, not the order I. Oh, that's why. So here's an example of this place in Pennsylvania in 2005. June, they had 2 murders. They cleared 2 murders. It's possible, and we see it right here in Alabama, they had 2 murders, but they cleared 3. The clearance could be as many months old as possible. They could clear a murder from 7 years before. So it's not exactly a useful metric in the month to month, because we're not saying, oh, the police had 8 crimes and then they solved 6. So we can't really interpret it that way, but maybe we can interpret it over longer periods of time. One interesting way to look at it, I'm just going to create a little subset of the data to plot, and one interesting way I can look at it is to look at it by year. Sometimes I think that the summarize function should be magic and read my mind. I don't need to tell it to sum the data. I'm sure they're working on that over in our studio as we speak, making it mind. But we're not quite there yet. But I actually want. And here's where we're going to introduce a new package, tidyr. And in tidyr, I'm going to reshape the data a little bit. ggplot2 pretty much always prefers, if you want to plot both of these series together, you actually need to stack the data long instead of having it be wide. And I love ggplot2, so I'm gonna abide by the way that it wants the data to be formatted. Now I have to read the documentation to remind myself how to do it because I don't usually do it this way. Well, it's just been a while since I've used tidyr and dplyr and all of them. I think what I want is gather. It's good that I'm going to figure this out now because it's coming up quite a bit. But I actually don't think this is what I want to use. Oh, it was so much easier than I thought. Oh, you. It shouldn't have taken me that long. Not exactly the most interesting thing to watch, but y is count, is type, And there we can see murder clearances and murder counts. Really interesting stuff. So I think that's going to be it for today. Hope you enjoyed the live stream. I'm going to make some more progress on my EDA, and I'm actually going to look up some of those key values, do some research to see, what the reported statistics are, and then see if I can, in this notebook, figure out the ways to replicate those so that I know I'm getting at least a reasonably close facsimile of the official statistics. And if I'm not, figure out what transformations I need to make that happen. So thanks for tuning in, and hope you enjoyed, and look for an update on what's coming up next week on the website, and we'll see you then. Bye.